Near the top of the world, on a windy treeless plain that runs north from Alaska's Brooks Range, scientists are busy learning about the Arctic's changing climate. Throughout the year, from the cold, dark months of winter to the mosquito-infested summer, a new era of scientific cooperation is taking place.
Gas flux, the changes in the biotic communities, the feedbacks on those to the human communities. To me, this is really exciting.
All of a sudden, information which I've collected is potentially interesting to a group of people that I don't know personally, not just to other ecologists, but to atmospheric scientists, to climatologists, to hydrologists, and so forth.
We're having vegetation people talk to climate people, talk to soil people, who are talking to sea ice people, and then they're all trying to talk to modelers who are basically physicists who are math majors in school.
The idea behind this is that we need to know the materials coming from the tundra to the atmosphere and to the ocean.
That we can use to measure the methane flux.
Funded by the National Science Foundation, scientists are sharing data to try to understand what controls the fluxes of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane between the land, atmosphere, and ocean. Linked to that is the connection of water, energy, and nutrients in the Arctic system.
The way in which the scientists have to interact these days is a totally different way of doing business than it was perhaps 10 or 20 years ago, and certainly 100 years ago.
There has been a warming in the Arctic, a very pronounced warming over recent decades. This warming has resulted in Arctic temperatures which are greater than any experience in the historical records.
Rising temperatures threaten to disrupt the lives of Arctic people by shifting the migration of the game animals they depend on. Also, thawing permafrost may undermine the foundations of their homes and roads. So Alaska's northern people are taking these forecasts seriously and even playing a key role in research.
Not only do we have a huge, super long history of associating with science from the outside, and you can see the continuation of it here at Naro, but our own lifestyle is dependent on science.
While the Arctic may seem remote, these scientists see Earth's life and climate as interconnected. Human activity anywhere on the globe could have an impact on the North's communities.
The increase in temperature that's occurred over the last few decades is consistent with the amount of CO2 that's been injected into the atmosphere by industrial processes and forest clearing.
Pollution from industrial centers in Europe, Russia, and North America have already tainted once pristine Arctic skies. And now, with rising temperatures, the far north is releasing back to the atmosphere tons of so-called greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, gases that have been locked up in frozen soil for thousands of years.
There's these different types that we can extract.
With so much at stake, these scientists hope their collaboration produces more than a useful model of the Arctic system. They believe they're also modeling the future of science. Apart from the ventures of early explorers, the Arctic has rarely attracted the interest of American policymakers. But during World War II, that changed when the U.S. ferried planes north through Canada and Alaska to the Soviet Union. Later, the Arctic became a front during the Cold War. Then discovery of oil on Alaska's North Slope brought large-scale industry to the region. Each time, scientists were asked to supply answers about the Arctic environment. Today, global warming has once again focused scientific attention northward. Scientists are modeling Arctic systems on supercomputers, hoping to reveal the climate's dynamic process. It turns out the Arctic's climate has sometimes undergone radical changes. Dr. Wendy Eisner is one of the Arctic system scientists trying to build up a portrait of the Arctic's ancient ecology. To do that, she's using one of nature's smallest, most durable objects, pollen.
Okay, so the shell of the pollen grain is made up of sporopollenin, and that's the most durable substance in nature. and they've found pollen millions of years old that's perfectly preserved.
By analyzing the pollen protected in frozen peat, Eisner can draw a rough sketch of the kind of plants that lived years ago on Alaska's North Slope. That in turn provides clues to past climates. To cross-check her work, Eisner also collects present-day pollen, then compares their count with vegetation maps of the area.
So when I find the old pollen assemblages, will I be pretty sure that this is a good, that it is representative of this landscape.
Eisner's profile of past Arctic ecologies will help her colleagues make sense of current changes. Pollen records also keep supercomputer models of future climates on track. By running the models backwards, the scientists in effect hindcast the weather instead of forecast it.
What we're trying to do is to include all of the processes that are important to the entire climate system, and that includes vegetation and soil moisture and the way the rivers flow through the land, and sea ice and salinity in the ocean, and a whole lot of processes that really haven't been dealt with in climate modelling before.
Trying to simulate an entire ecosystem, past or present, taxes even the largest supercomputer. Lynch must design new equations and link them in unique ways to describe the Arctic's dynamics. The real computing power comes in applying those equations over and over again.
We have to divide the system that we're interested in, which in this case is Alaska, into blocks, and we divide it up into chunks over the land and then up through the atmosphere, and we have to perform those calculations on each one of those chunks.
Lynch is making those chunks smaller and smaller because scientists and policymakers are depending on the model's accuracy. As the supercomputers grind through the problems and assemble models of the climate, scientists are gaining a new appreciation for the power that feedback plays.
Warmer climate, more carbon comes out of the soil. The more carbon comes out of the soil, the warmer the climate, the more carbon, the more permafrost melts, the more carbon comes out of the soil. This is a positive feedback loop.
Snow cover is another feedback mechanism that could influence global climate change.
In September, when the land goes from green to white, its albedo, how much solar energy it reflects, changes from something like it absorbs 70% when it's green, and it can absorb as little as 20% when it's snow-covered.
And since the sun drives the Earth's climate, changing the global energy budget means changing the weather. While equations drive computer models, their accuracy depends on data and lots of it. Arctic scientists realized they'd have to scale up their research to provide that data. Biologist Walter Schell directs the Global Change Research Group at San Diego State University. He's using towers to measure carbon dioxide and water vapor movement. First, he samples gas concentrations in small chambers on the ground.
It's looking at the CO2 concentration as the air moves up and down, and then knowing the amount of air that's moved and the concentration, it's possible to calculate the CO2 movement across the surface, up or down. And it does the same thing for water vapor.
To learn about CO2 on a wider scale, O'Shell uses a light experimental aircraft. An instrument mounted on the nose of the plane collects data the towers cannot.
Our plan is to combine the aircraft measurements that give us a continuous spatial pattern of CO2 flux with the tower measurements that give us a continuous temporal pattern of CO2 flux.
Skip Walker is taking an even higher approach to Arctic research. His goal is to produce a map of the Arctic's landscape and vegetation.
We use a variety of techniques, from photo interpretation of aerial photographs. We use satellite-derived images and classify them using computer techniques.
But to quantify his data, he must go into the field to make sense of the images with what scientists call ground truthing.
We have to have accurate knowledge of what are the vegetation, soils, landforms on the ground. So a great deal of our effort is spent describing vegetation, mapping vegetation in the field.
Walker's database map provides baseline information for many Arctic system scientists.
Hydrologists are using it because we have hydrologic components in the database. We need to know the relationship between snow, vegetation, landscapes, soils.
This collaboration underscores the other key aspect of Arctic system science: researchers from various disciplines joining forces to untangle the mysteries of an ecosystem. To capture the dynamics of the Arctic year-round, the newly formed Corps of Scientists set out to map the flow of nutrients, energy, and greenhouse gases through the environment. They call this movement Flux, and with snow covering the landscape for most of the year, it's a key component. Glenn Liston and Matthew Sturm are snow scientists. They dig trenches and measure for depth and temperature.
Most people look at snow and they say cold, white, what else is there to know? But snow is sort of one of the unstable members of that system.
Besides playing a crucial role in the amount of energy the Earth captures, snow traps the summer heat under a blanket that can last 10 months a year.
I like to think of it as a quilt, but a quilt that's got a lot of rips and tears and thin spots in it. It's a complicated quilt, but nonetheless, it's a wonderful blanket that holds heat in the ground and lets it out much more slowly than if there was no blanket.
Global climate models forecast more snow for Alaska's North Slope, but they also predict it will melt sooner.
Its strength, its insulation, the amount of solar radiation it reflects changes dramatically depending on the type of snow, and it changes in most places through the season. So people who just look and see white are really not looking close enough.
51, 36, 25.
All winter, tiny computers perched on thin rods have been taking the ground's temperature.
The advent of data loggers, little computers that would automatically record the stuff, has made it possible for a single person like me to build an array, put it somewhere, let it run all winter, and come back and have 86,000 numbers.
Even so, the challenge of scientifically measuring an entire ecosystem has Sturm turning to a new radar system that enables him to peer past the surface into the snow's structure. Snow has various layers that control its dynamics during melt-off. Each ping the radar sends gets bounced back, in effect drawing a picture of the snow's internal makeup.
If you have a heavy snowpack, you have a lot of water. That means you're going to have a big runoff event in the spring. There's all the little ponds and wetlands are going to be replenished with water.
Even as snow researchers wrap up their season, hydrologists Doug Kane, Larry Hinsman, and their crews are also working in the Arctic.
Because it'll jump all over the place.
At breakup, scientists take water samples from rivers to analyze nutrient content.
one of the most important processes occurring throughout the winter is the accumulation of snow. It is stored there all winter, and in a very brief period in the spring it melts. In 10 or 12 days in the spring it all melts at one time.
And so there's water from snowmelt early in the spring when the plants really need water to get started. But also water in the active layer is important in decomposition processes, the breakdown of organic material in the soil, and the production of gases like methane and CO2.
Essential to life and climate, water plays a key role in every flux activity in Arctic system science. From the Brooks Range to the coast, Kane and Hinsman and their teams battle the ever-present plagues of mosquitoes to set up towers on the tundra. These are near the Kuparuk River and measure the solar energy hitting the snow and the rate of evaporation.
Okay.
Other instruments gauge soil moisture, track the flow of streams, and sample the amount of nutrients washed to the sea.
We do all these measurements to understand the processes and their interactions so that we can develop models, so that we can extend them to other time periods and to other areas.
Beyond nutrients, the Arctic's waterways and lakes are also a source for greenhouse gas, something scientists have only recently discovered.
Initially, what people thought was that there was really just an exchange of carbon, CO2, from the atmosphere to the land and then back.
But that assumption proved to be too simple. Now George Kling and John Hobby are studying the role that the Arctic's lakes and streams play in global change. By adding trace chemicals to the streams, Kling measures the nutrients in the water.
We started looking in detail at this and making some measurements and determined that the amount of carbon that goes up to the atmosphere just from the lakes and streams is about 20% of the global total of carbon that's fixed by plants in the Arctic.
Ecologist Terry Chapin is studying the effects warmer, drier conditions will have on Arctic vegetation, and in turn, how changing plant communities will affect the production of methane, a potent greenhouse gas.
Well, we don't know what warmer temperatures will do to this ecosystem. One of the things that we're quite sure is going to happen is there will be changes in soil moisture, probably drying out of soils. The major methane producing areas of the north, a very large part of the global methane budget, of the natural methane budget, is accounted for by wetlands like these. So changes in the species composition, changes in the environment, anything that affects methane flux is going to have probably have a substantial effect on the global methane budget and global warming.
In miniature greenhouses and special plots, Chapin mimics possible scenarios, removing plants and warming things up.
Here what we can do is look at the effects of changes in climate. So we can warm the climate in this way, and we can look at the effect of that on methane flux.
While the Arctic generates far less methane than CO2, methane is 20 to 30 times more potent as a greenhouse gas. Bill Rieberg is trying to get a fix on the Arctic's methane budget. Rieberg concentrates on lowering the water table to measure methane production. Wetter conditions generate more methane, but less CO2.
Initially, we thought that as things warmed up and the water table dropped, that we would end up with less methane being produced because the system would dry out. Right now, I think what we believe is it's going to still be a source, but it will be a smaller source.
Still, methane compounded with rising CO2 levels means the Arctic is generating record levels of greenhouse gases. And whether it exhales them into the air or leaches them into the streams, the source for the carbon lies in the soil. Since climate models predict rising temperatures could thaw permafrost, scientists are studying it in detail.
We're looking deeper into the permafrost soil part because of the organic carbon, not only in the upper part in the active layer, but they are also in the frozen part.
Soil scientist Chen-Lu Ping must use a jackhammer to free the secrets held in the ice-locked earth. He and his colleagues are studying soil, not just for frozen carbon, but also for clues to the past.
Ice is more close to the surface, but
At selected sites along the North Slope, Chen-Lu Ping samples the soil composition, gauges the depth of frost, and notes the type of vegetation lying above the ground. From these sites, he hopes to provide scientists with a composite profile of Arctic soil that will aid plant biologists, ecologists, and climate modelers. Later in the season, near Barrow, Alaska soil scientists Ken Hinkle, Fritz Nelson, Jim Bachheim, and Sam Outcalt are digging their own trenches and using probes to produce a similar profile.
Now we have these sort of untouched by human hands electronic devices that will run all winter that Ken's been working, Fritz have been working with. And these give us a lot more power and precision and able to learn things that we never even suspected were happening before, like this tremendous burst in temperature, increase in temperature at snowmelt.
And what we're trying to do here is to characterize the thickness of the active layer, the zone that freezes and thaws on an annual basis above permafrost, with as much statistical precision as we possibly can.
These scientists have an edge in their research, as Barrow has supported a long line of scientific study. This area has been designated as a permanently protected site by local residents.
And what we found is that there was an average increase in the ice content in the upper permafrost by about 5%, implying that over those 30 years, water has moved down. There's been a net flux of water down into the permafrost for unknown reasons.
These unexpected findings have raised questions about global climate change models.
Now, it's possible that with an increase in temperature, it could lead actually to a thickening of or more vegetative productivity, which could ultimately lead to greater insulating qualities in the vegetative mat. The relation between global warming and active layer thickness may not be as straightforward as has been hypothesized.
With all of the science activity on the North Slope of Alaska, it's natural for people in those communities to say, well, gosh, if people are spending all this money on this science, maybe there's something important that's going to happen to us.
Some of the questions center on climate change and its effect on the migration of game species like caribou, animals northern people depend on. To find answers, Cruise draws in part on native experience. The North Slope Borough funds its own research, in part because northern people are so deeply connected to the natural world and its bounty, a relationship many see threatened by global change. Richard Glenn is just one of the local scientists trying to educate others.
We're trying to avoid this, what I used to call colonial science, where the researcher perceives a need from outside the community, comes in, visits the community, gathers his data, and leaves, and is never seen again. His results are never seen again. If he asked anyone here questions, he doesn't get back with them on the results of that study or cite them as references.
Bowhead whales in the spring migration along the Alaskan coast use leads in the sea ice. When the sea ice disappears, they no longer have to use the leads. They can be much further off and maybe outside of the reach of the native subsistence hunters that come out of the villages.
And if the runoff from glaciers and ice caps raise sea levels, as some models suggest, low-lying deltas around the world could be swamped. One such region, Alaska's Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, supports thousands of waterfowl each summer.
About in the neighborhood of 2,500 brant are estimated to be shot annually by subsistence hunters on the Yukon Delta.
Biologist Jim Sedinger is studying what higher ocean levels would mean for waterfowl and the people who harvest them.
In our model, we're taking data that relate harvest to population size to model that relationship. But we really know nothing about what socioeconomic factors determine the relationship between harvest of geese and population size of geese.
Types, then we can extrapolate these to the Park Basin based on.
Without the collaborative efforts of all the Arctic system scientists, the important exchange of information essential for learning about the changing Arctic system would be all the more difficult.
Just focusing on one of the Earth's system.
The collaboration and data sharing are paving the way for greater discoveries and scientific cooperation in the search for clues about global change.
One of the ways that all of science is starting to go now, at least environmental science, is to bring these small, seemingly disconnected disciplines together in order to solve a problem or a question that everyone can relate to.
Unfortunately, as scientists try to incorporate complex systems like human communities into their computer pictures of the future, the more difficult the forecasts become.
What we're finding is that an ecosystem that's remote from direct human activity, intervention, is being affected very strongly by a change in the global environment.
But that leaves open the question of, well, then what can we do? And are these, quote, simulations or pictures of the future helpful? And I think that's where we have the most work to do.
As the human population continues to increase, there's going to be more and more pressure on the world's resources. As an ecologist, I feel a responsibility to learn something that'll help predict how these changes will occur and what might be done to minimize those changes.
Despite the uncertainty surrounding future climate models, these scientists say the stakes are too high to ignore the disturbing trends clearly taking place in the Arctic today.